Shooting 22s in the cold and clothing layering options this week on Mail Call Mondays. Mail Call Mondays is sponsored by Modular Driven Technologies. If you need a chassis system for your precision rifle, check out mdttac.com. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this is the first Mail Call Mondays of 2018. We are going to kick this off by talking about the last NRL 22 match of 2017, which we shot this weekend just before the new year. And it was fairly cold, so I want to talk to you a little bit about how the rifle performed in the cold, and also you guys have asked about some clothing layering options or clothing systems for the cold range conditions, so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. First off, I want to thank everybody that showed up at the Westside Sportsman's Club National Rifle League 22 match this weekend here in southern Indiana. We were kind of expecting a small turnout because it was fairly cold, and we actually got a pretty decent turnout. I think one of the larger turnouts that we've had so far since we've started shooting those matches. So thanks to everybody that came out and braved the cold. Now to the bad part of things. This is the coldest 22 match that I've shot, and I found out some really interesting things about running a semi-automatic 22 in the cold. All of my centerfire rifles perform equally well in the cold than they do in the warm weather, and it is generally just the shooter that is the weak link in the cold weather. Well, I found out at this weekend's match that the Ruger 1022 that I have sitting in front of me, not all of them, just the one I have sitting in front of me, has some issues in the cold weather. And I think I've kind of isolated it down to the ammunition. Not the ammunition itself, but the lubricant that they use on the ammunition. Those of you guys that have shot Wolf Match Target or SK or a lot of the other ammunition types out there know that this ammo has a waxy kind of lube on the outside of the bullets and the cases. Now it's mainly supposed to help the bullet moving down the barrel, reduce lead fouling, give you a little bit higher velocity, I believe, and make things a little bit more consistent. But that lubricant also ends up getting all over the cases themselves, and it ends up all over the inside of the action. Well, during warm weather or even just at body temperature, that lubricant is really thin, it's really oily, and it's really not that big of a deal. It actually helps things run smoothly. When we get down into sub-freezing temperatures, that stuff turns into more like a wax than a oil, and it seems to tend to gum things up a little bit. Now, bolt-action rifles, it's not much of an issue. It can be a little bit of an issue, but since you are using your body power to close that bolt, if there's a little bit more drag, you just push a little harder. Well, with a Match 22, there's not a lot of energy in there to send that bolt back, and if it's not sending the bolt all the way back, it doesn't have enough to send the bolt all the way forward. And what I was noticing is that when the gun was warm, first brought out of the car, ready to go, it cycled okay, but as it sat out in the weather and cooled off, it started to jam, and then actually at the end, when it was totally cold, the bolt would not come back far enough to even either fully eject the case or eject the case and feed the next case out of the magazine. The reason I believe that it was the lube and not really anything else going on here is that I grabbed my little tactical towel here out of my range bag and wiped off the lube off of a magazine full of cartridges and ran them through, and they almost ran reliably. I still had a couple of hiccups on it, but I was actually able to finish shooting the match, and I didn't have to just drop out of the match. But it did cost me quite a few points. There was at least one stage where I only got off 4 shots out of 10, and it really killed me in the overall standings on this match. So now what I'm going to end up having to do is go out here a little bit later this week while we're still into these nice cold temperatures and try this out with wiping all of my ammo down, getting as much of the lube off of it as possible, and running it and see if it runs reliably. I'll also may go out and test some higher velocity ammo in the cold just to see what the accuracy difference is in the high velocity ammo versus the target ammo. And the reason being is the razor's edge accuracy doesn't help me much at all if I'm not actually getting my shots down range. Now, aside from the cycling issues that I had with the rifle, with that ammunition, I did have a few little tiny issues with the scope. Now, the temperatures were cold enough to make it difficult to adjust the magnification on the scope. I was able to adjust the parallax just fine, but because the scope was so cold and the controls were getting difficult to adjust, I didn't dial at all. I used the reticle in the Athlon to hold for all of the stages. So I didn't dial at all during this, just held over, and that worked fine. But I did notice that the magnification ring, it's moving really fairly smoothly now with a little bit of resistance. Then there's a little bit of lash in it, but it's moving smoothly. While we were out at the range, it was almost like it was cemented in one position. It took an incredible amount of force to be able to move it. So I really got it to a pretty much a medium area, like between 16 and 20 power, and kind of left it there. I really wish I would have left a breakaway coaster on here. I threw one on just to see if it would fit, and it will fit on the magnification ring, but I took it back off because it was fairly large and it was getting in the way when the rifle was in the case. So that may go back on if I run this optic in the cold weather on the next match, because I just need that extra purchase to turn the ring, especially when I'm wearing gloves. Other than that, everything else functioned just fine. The rifle was providing fairly decent accuracy when I actually got the shots down range. Now, one other thing that I seem to notice is with the first shot or two out of the bore, my shots were dropping low. I was getting about 1 mil low through the scope on those shots in the 50 to 100 yard range. And then after that first or second shot, then it would pop back up and it would be zero where it's supposed to be. I haven't fully explained that one yet. What I tend to believe, and this is just a wild guess right now, is I tend to believe that the lubricant that is in the barrel is cold and it has more viscosity to it, so it's resisting that bullet through. So that first shot or two are probably coming out a little bit slower than the rest of them. And after that first shot or two, that friction has warmed up the lube that is in the barrel, and the rest of them are coming out a little bit faster. Now, we haven't taken the magneto speed chronograph out and strapped it on and actually shot for velocity yet. I will probably do that a little bit later this week, and hopefully next Mail Call Mondays I'll be able to report back to you on how well that worked, and if I was actually seeing a velocity difference in the cold between the first couple of shots and the last few shots in the magazine. So some really interesting things that I'm trying to figure out. Again, this is pretty much new ground for me, shooting rim fires in the freezing cold. It's not something that I really do all that often. Even as a kid, when I was out shooting rim fires all the time, I was shooting high velocity ammo, and if I was shooting in the cold, I was hunting rabbits, which really does not take a super high degree of accuracy. It's more about how quickly you can swing a rifle and get the sights on the target. So we're kind of feeling things out as we go, but I'd really like to hear what you guys are experiencing. I know we're shooting these NRL 22 matches all around the country. Some of them are in the negative temperatures. So I really want to hear what you guys are finding as far as shooting match ammunition in the freezing cold. And when this is all said and done, it may change my opinion on shooting a bolt action versus shooting the semi-automatic rifles, at least through the winter months. I do have a Savage Mark II BTVS sitting around here that hasn't been getting a lot of use, and I may end up switching it over and building it up as an open gun for the colder months. So we'll just kind of see how it goes. I really, really like the 1022. I just have to work through this little problem and see how it goes from there. And there were a couple of other semi-automatic rifles that were having some issues out at the range. And as I mentioned, even some of the bolt-action rifles were having issues because as that lube gets built up in there, I think it was causing some extraction issues on some of those guns as well. So we'll see how that goes. A couple of other things on the NRL 22 standpoint. My stockpile of Wolf ammo is about expended, and the supply on it has been kind of spotty. I have got a chance to try some of the Norma Match 22, and we are not sponsored by Wolf or Norma. This is just my opinion on it, and I found that the Norma Match 22 shoots as well as the Wolf in this rifle. Now, you always want to test ammo in your rifle, because even though it works well in our 1022 with a Green Mountain barrel, you may have the exact same setup and it may not work well in yours. 22s are just extremely picky about ammunition, so you want to test and even test the cheaper stuff. Don't just test the expensive stuff, because you may find that a cheaper ammo shoots better than the top-end match ammo. So make sure you give it a try out different lots of ammunition. And we talked a couple of Mail Call Mondays back about my practices for testing different ammunition. So go ahead and jump back and check out that episode. The Norma seemed to work fairly well for me, and I was able to latch on to about 5,000 rounds of that. So I will be switching over to the Norma ammo for this rifle for most of the matches, and that should take care of me fairly well into 2018. One other interesting thing that we found, and this came from a recommendation off of Facebook on one of our Facebook viewers, I picked up a Pelican 1040 case, and this thing will hold 8 of the Ruger 10-round magazines just fine. If you put the rubber covers on them, then it will only hold 6 turned sideways. But this will hold 8 magazines just fine. And the really nice thing about this versus just using these covers and throwing them in your bag is that I can look in here and I can instantly tell which ones are the expended magazines, because they have no more rounds into them, and which ones are the full magazines. So it makes it really quick just to pop this box open, grab my magazines, and go. At this last match, this is the first time I have used this setup, and it was so much nicer to be able to have all my ammo preloaded in magazines, because the NRL matches you're only shooting 50 rounds. So to have all my magazines and my zero ammo all loaded up and just be able to pop the box open, grab a magazine, close it, and then go, and not try to fumble with ammunition while you're wearing gloves and you have cold hands and you're trying to get your stage brief and all this stuff. So it's nice to be able to preload it at home and have it ready to go. I'll leave a link for this Pelican case down below. It really wasn't that expensive. It has a rubber insert in it, so stuff's not really rattling around. And since the top's clear, it's really easy to see exactly what you have in here. Really nice setup overall. So thank you for that recommendation. I'm really enjoying it, and there's all kinds of extra stuff on here, like there's a spot for carabiner, there's a spot for loop, so you could tie this on the outside of your range bag if you wanted to and drag it around. I just throw it in the side of the rifle case and I pull it out and sit it on the bench when I actually get there and I'm ready to go. So that's it as far as the 22 stuff. Now let's talk about clothing really quick, because it was pretty cold at that match. It was even colder today when I was out at the range. I went out and did some AR work, some carbine close quarter stuff, and it was 1 degree when I left the house for the range. And I know some of you guys, 1 degree is not a cold winter. Here in southern Indiana, that's pretty cold. We're not really climatized to much below that. It'll get a little bit lower than that in our coldest winter days. But this is pretty cold when you're spending a couple hours out on the range. So a couple of you guys asked what my clothing system is. And bear in mind, it'll differ depending upon where you're at, and it'll definitely differ depending upon your budget. I suffered for a long time with military issued equipment, which it's not bottom shelf, but again, it's made by the lowest bidder, and it is made specifically so that you survive, not so that you're comfortable, not so you enjoy the outside activity, but just so that you're mission effective. And there's a big difference between being effective and enjoying the activity that you're doing in the cold. So as I've progressed through my outdoor experiences, I've kind of increased the amount that I spend on outdoors gear. Recently, I have converted a lot of the stuff that I wear over to Arc'teryx. There are a bunch of other outdoor brands out there, but I found that I really like the cut, I like the materials, and I like the construction of Arc'teryx gear, specifically their Leaf line, and that is LEAF, and it stands for Law Enforcement and Armed Forces. There are a couple of distributors out there that will sell Leaf to everyone. If you are military or law enforcement, then you may apply for Arc'teryx Leaf store. They have an online setup, and we'll leave a link for that down below. If you go there, you can apply, and if you're accepted, then you have access to fairly reasonable pricing. Now, it's still expensive, but it's much less expensive than you can generally find on eBay or on the open market for their military and law enforcement gear. The gear that I was wearing today, I'll start off with my top end. I was wearing just a regular cheap synthetic base layer shirt, and I like to wear a compression shirt underneath everything, and mainly the purpose of that shirt is just to wick away the sweat. If I start doing a lot of activity, building up some body heat, and start to get any little bit of moisture on my skin, then that layer will help pull it away, and it keeps you from feeling wet. If you wear a cotton t-shirt, even underneath a bunch of extra insulating layers, and that cotton absorbs moisture, then if it cools off, then you'll get this cold, clammy, nasty feeling against your skin, and it can make you feel cold, colder than you really actually are. So I like to wear synthetics or merino wool against my skin. Now, a cheap synthetic compression shirt will usually work very well. If I'm just going out on a range day, then cheap synthetic shirts work well. I'll wear them underneath body armor while I'm in my regular working capacity because they're smooth. They allow the armor to move with my body, and again, they still transport moisture. Now, if I'm going out into the backcountry and I'm going to be out for a couple of days, that's where I will generally pick something like merino wool or some of the more advanced, more expensive synthetics that have silver or other antimicrobial stuff woven in. Because what that will do is that will keep that sweat and that bacteria that comes off your skin from really getting nasty and really causing a pretty bad funk there underneath all your other layers. So that merino wool naturally is antimicrobial, and some of the more advanced synthetics have antimicrobial stuff built in. The cheap shirts will really stink. They'll really get a really bad funk after a couple of days if you don't have the ability to take them off and actually wash them with a detergent. I've even noticed a quick rinse in a shower or sink or in a stream. Very often that does not get rid of the funk. You actually have to wash them with a good detergent to get rid of it. So keep that in mind. But for a regular day out at the range, a cheap synthetic base layer will work pretty well compared to the cost of some of the top shelf stuff. Now, what I was wearing today over the synthetic shirt was Arc'teryx Delta AR, and this is a grid fleece, kind of a quarter zip type shirt. And what that did is give me my initial layer of air close to the skin, and it's still a more form-fitting garment, so I don't have a lot of bulk moving around there. Now, over top of that, I wore a Arc'teryx Atom LT, and that is really one of my favorite jackets. If you are getting into high-end outdoor gear and you live in the more temperate zones, a Atom LT is a great all-around jacket. I've got a black leaf line Arc'teryx jacket. That one is awesome because it's just a regular collar. It's not the hooded jacket, and it's black and has subdued logos on it. So I can throw that on with a polo shirt and khakis or a nice pair of jeans and go out to dinner, and it's just a great all-around jacket. It's also in the middle of form-fitting. I wear a large jacket in most most of the Arc'teryx are outdoor clothing lines. I'll usually wear like an extra large jacket if it's just a big box store type jacket. But the large Atom LT still allows me to conceal a handgun in the appendix carry mode just fine with no problems at all. I can conceal it somewhat behind the hip, but it prints a little bit more in the large jacket. So it's a great all-around jacket. I actually did wear the hooded version of that jacket down to Peru, up in the Peruvian Andes, and it's just a really awesome all-around piece. But the one drawback of the Atom LT jacket is it does have kind of open side panels on it. The front and back of the jacket has a substantial layer of core loft in it. The sleeves have a little bit lighter layer of core loft in them, and core loft is a synthetic insulation. But the sides have a Polartec material on them that does allow ventilation. So if you are wearing just an Atom LT as an outer layer and you get a cold wind that blows cross body, then it will blow through and you'll actually feel the wind come through. So I will very often wear another layer over top of that if it's really chilly out. If it's just around freezing, then I can get away with throwing a soft shell over top of it. And my favorite right now is an Arc'teryx Drac. That's DRAC. That is, again, one of their leaf line jackets, and it's a nice heavy-duty stretch type material. But that soft shell will keep out a little bit of moisture, a little bit of a light rain or light snow, and it will block out a lot of that wind. It's not totally windproof, but it still allows in high output activities, if I'm running and gunning, to be able to get a little bit of moisture, a little bit of that heat out. Now today, since it was well below freezing, I put another layer on top of that, and that was my cold weather LT jacket. That is an awesome overall jacket if you're going to be in more static activities. It has a heavier layer of synthetic insulation in it, and it has a windstopper membrane in it. So whereas a lot of the other pieces that I wear allow a good deal of ventilation, that way all that sweat, all that extra moisture has a place to go. This really helps seal you up a little bit. So if you have a good heavy wind blowing, then it's not blowing through and it's not taking away all that warm air that you're trying to hold around your body. It's a great overall jacket because it's not waterproof, but it has a durable water repellent finish on the outside of it. So when it rains or it snows, if it's just one of those light misty rains, then it'll bead up on the jacket pretty well and roll off. During snow, the snow will usually slough off quick enough that it's not building up and soaking through. Now, if you're in a really damp environment, then the material will eventually wet out. But since it's synthetic, it will still help give you some insulation even after it wets out. I do have down jackets if I am backpacking or going up high altitude. I do like to wear down because it packs down a whole lot more. It's easy to get out, fluff back up, and throw on when you need that warmth when you stop or if you're stopping at the end of the day. And that's one of those things where weight is really at a premium when I'm backpacking at high altitude. But when I'm down here on the range, I really don't so much care about the weight or the compressibility of a jacket. I care about resistance to the elements. I care about it keeping me warm, and it has to be durable enough that if I'm getting down on the ground or I'm manipulating weapons, I'm not going to shred it. And that's one of the nice things about the leaf line stuff is the outer materials on it tend to be a little bit heavier than their civilian version stuff. A lot of the leaf line garments have civilian versions in brighter colors, different colors. I really like those as well. For instance, I have the leaf black Atom LT, and then I have a bright green Atom LT hoodie. And the material is just a little bit heavier duty on the black leaf version, a little bit lighter on the civilian version, but I don't generally intend to be rolling around on the ground in the civilian version. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking at the two. Now, there are some pieces like the cold weather LT that do not have a civilian version. They only have the leaf line version, so you have to go to a leaf distributor if you want to get that. But that's my general upper body garments for cold weather like we had today, where we were down in the single digits. If it starts to rain or I start to get a significant snowfall, then I will throw a hard shell over top of that, and I've got an Arc'teryx Beta AR that's a nice Gore-Tex jacket that I throw on, and that will keep me dry in some pretty severe conditions. Now let's switch to my lower half. My legs, generally I produce a good deal of heat through my legs. I've got pretty hairy legs, so they're already providing a insulating layer there on their own. But on a day like today, I need a little bit extra down there. So I had a lightweight gridded fleece long johns on. They're just Condor, cheap brand. I haven't upgraded to Arc'teryx long johns yet because generally around here, it's only a few months during the winter where I'm actually wearing insulating layers on my legs like that. Over top of that, I had a set of Arc'teryx combat pants. Again, those are leaf line pants, and they are a really nice stretch material. So they don't give any resistance. They have great pockets. They've got some really nice cargo pockets, some of the best designed cargo pockets I've seen, and regular slash pockets and zip rear pockets. The beautiful thing about the combat pants is that, again, they're soft shell, so they give a little bit of wind resistance, but they breathe really well as well. So if you are in static positions, that may not be the best thing in the world, but if you're moving, then that stretch allows the pants to move with you and not bunch up, even if you're wearing extra layers underneath them. But they also allow you to vent some of that moisture that you're going to start building up through sweat. The grid fleece is just enough to keep that soft shell material off my skin, because when you get into the colder weather, if you let that soft shell material lay against your skin, then you get cold really quick. It will just suck the heat right out of your skin. So you want a barrier between that and just a medium weight gridded Polartec type material works wonders in that. If it was just a little bit warmer, then I would go with a next to skin compression type base layer underneath there, again, just to keep the material off my skin. And that works really well in the freezing or just below freezing area. When we get down to single digits, again, I need a little bit more air gap in there. Now, if I was going to stand still for a long amount of time, I would start getting pretty cold in my legs with that setup. And you really need some kind of insulation or a shell or something to really keep that wind out when you're static there. Now, on my feet, I have to be careful because my feet do get cold pretty quickly. I was wearing a Smart Wool liner sock, a Smart Wool heavyweight hiker sock over top of that. And then I was wearing a set of a Solo Fugitive GTX boots. They are not winter boots. They don't have any kind of extra insulation in them. They're just Gore-Tex lined hiking boot. And again, for freezing, just below freezing temperatures, as long as I'm active, those boots are great. For standing on a concrete pad in single digits, they are not the greatest boots in the world, and my toes were cold by the time we were done with our range session. Now, I just ordered a set of Salomon Tundra boots, and they are rated to -40 degrees. So we'll see when those come in, if they actually work better for standing around on a concrete pad. They were probably way overkill for even the harshest southern Indiana winters. But if you start getting up places where you're slogging through snow all the time, a little bit of extra insulation on your feet is really, really important. Now we'll talk about something that I get the most comments on, and that's gloves. Now today, pretty much just this light set of North Face fleece gloves. These are about 2 years old now. I had the predecessor to these gloves. These have pads for mobile devices to be able to be touch sensitive. I had the predecessors to these that just had the rubber pads instead of the touch sensitive, and they lasted for probably 3 or 4 years before I blew out the side on the trigger finger. I could tape them up or stitch them up or something, and they'd still work for a good while. The palms and the outside of the gloves are just great, but I just blew out that finger, and I figured it was cheap enough just to get a new pair instead of worrying about fixing them. Again, they're North Face. They're just regular fleece. They are really nice for a couple of different reasons. First of all, they are form-fitting enough that they still offer the ability to manipulate weapon controls, but they are loose enough that I can get them on and off really fast. So when I'm working, if I think it's a situation where I'm going to need to draw a handgun from a retention holster very quickly, then it's easy to slip these gloves off, drop them in the seat of the car, stick them in my pocket whatsoever, and then have a bare hand to be able to better manipulate the handgun. But if I'm caught unaware and I need to go to guns quickly, they don't really slow me down much, and they don't prevent me from operating the controls on my holster or operating my handgun. Today I actually did some handgun shooting and I was wearing them for the whole time. They're not ideal. They offer a little bit of compromise on the weapon grip versus bare hands or versus actual shooting gloves, but they work. Now, for precision rifle work, I think these things are absolutely great. I don't feel the need to actually take my gloves off at any point while I'm shooting precision rifle. While I was shooting the 22 match this weekend, I pretty much had these on my hand the whole time. I didn't take them off at all to go up and shoot. I was able to manipulate the trigger, manipulate the rifle just fine. The trigger finger pads on these, because they have this sensor material in that, they are a little bit more compact than some other gloves, and so you don't have a lot of material between the pad of your finger and between the trigger, so you still get decent trigger feel. Now the trigger on this rifle is a couple of pounds. It's relatively heavy, so I can feel the material in the glove compress before I can start moving the trigger. If you are running a trigger that is measured in ounces, then gloves can cause you some problems there, and you may need to go with a bare finger or trigger mitts or something of that nature. But that's one of the reasons I don't like to run super light triggers, especially super light single stage triggers in the winter. I prefer two-stage triggers in the winter because I can feel that take up. I can feel the compression between the trigger and the glove before we actually get to that hard stop and start the trigger break. So North Face, just regular fleece gloves, work really well. They're not super tactical. You can find them in big box stores everywhere. I'm quite certain that they're made in China, if that matters to you. But they work and they're relatively inexpensive. Now switch over to something a little bit more expensive. If I have to do something that is more tactically oriented, or I need to be a little bit more sure about weapons manipulation, and these are what I wear most of the time when I'm actually on patrol or when I'm doing anything that requires more dexterity. These are Outdoor Research halberd sensor gloves. They are not designed as winter gloves at all. They're actually designed as summer gloves. They have some really nice vent holes in the material on the palms, and they have kind of more of a mesh material on the back. But what I found is, unless the wind is blowing, these guys work great as contact gloves. And with contact gloves, you're just trying to keep your skin off the metal or off of cold materials that you happen to be touching. You're not really trying to provide any insulation with them. And then they also provide a little bit of protection. It seems to me that when the temperatures get colder, it's easier for me to tear my hands open and bleed all over everything without even really realizing it, because you just get that little bit of numbness in your hands, and then you don't instantly notice when you've lacerated your hand on your weapon. So it's nice to wear something that gives me just a little bit of added protection. The dexterity on these is absolutely fantastic. There's very thin material in the trigger fingers, so pressing a trigger even on a light trigger pull rifle should not be a problem at all. The fit on these gloves is very, very nice for me. They are one of the few gloves that I can actually shoot a 1911 well with, because I can still engage that grip safety and get a good grip on the handgun. A lot of times when you spread your thumb and your trigger finger, you get this web of material between trigger finger and thumb, and that can cause some issues, especially on that 1911 grip safety. With these, it's not a problem at all. They do have the little rubber dots on here that have been incrementally peeling off I seem to find that with just about all gloves. If they have any kind of grip surface on there, then they'll eventually peel off and fall off. You'll find them stuck to everything. Not a big deal though. It's just kind of to be expected. One thing I do wish they did away with is they have these rubber appliques on the back that are like arrows. And I think those are supposed to be some kind of rudimentary knuckle protection. While they may serve just fine for that, they do get in the way of using the back of your glove as a snot wiper when your nose starts running in the middle of the winter. And that's kind of nice to be able to wipe your face with the back of your gloved hands. That may not be a big deal. Some people may sound kind of gross to others, but that's life when you're out in really cold weather. Sometimes you need to wipe things away from your face, and it's better to be able to do that than have to fish a rag out of your pants somewhere or take your glove off and do whatever you need to do. So I really wish they didn't have those on there, or if they were going to do that, then just do a bar across the knuckles and leave the back of the hand open. So that's just one of the little drawbacks on it. They do have a nice pull tab here or slash carabiner hole that works great for pulling them on. I haven't had any problems with it ripping out yet. They are Velcro at the cuff. I usually leave it fastened just enough that I can pull these on without having to undo the Velcro and pull them off when I need to pull them off. And the only drawback there is you do have a little bit of hook that's exposed here that will catch on some jacket cuffs, and it may cause some abrasion if you've got a really soft material on your jacket cuffs. But those are the OR halberd sensor gloves, and they do, since they are sensor gloves, they do work with mobile devices. The trigger finger and the thumb is touch sensitive, so you can work an iPhone with these gloves on, which is really nice if I'm out and I need to access phone numbers, contact information, etc., without actually pulling my gloves off. Again, we're not sponsored by Outdoor Research. I picked these up to see if they would work for what I needed them to work for, and they did pretty well. So I'm really impressed with those. Unfortunately, I have a set of more winter-oriented Outdoor Research gloves that I purchased. These, again, are mediums, and I purchased this other set of OR gloves in medium, and they are way, way too tight. They ended up ripping the pull tabs off. So I've got a call into OR customer service that hasn't been answered yet, and we'll see if we can get those switched out. And after I get some chance to work with those, I'll come back and tell you how well those work. Those are the OR cold shot gloves. They're great quality with the exception of the pull loop. I just wish I could wear them. I wish their sizing was a little bit more consistent with them. So again, when we get some information from OR customer service, I'll let you know a little bit more about those gloves. That is about it for the clothing that I wear in the cold weather. Now, I know some of you guys are going to comment that the Arc'teryx stuff is fairly expensive. There is a compromise to be made if you are going with Arc'teryx stuff, or you're going with military surplus stuff, or if you're just throwing on Carhartts or one of the Carhartt knockoffs. The thing is, usually when you get into those higher price tiers, you are getting higher performance materials, you're getting less weight, you're getting a little bit more durability for that weight. Now, if you go get, for instance, a set of Carhartts, you're going to be able to beat them a little bit more than you would some of the top-end Arc'teryx stuff, but there's a vast weight difference in the materials there as well. If you don't need to be able to move fast, you may be able to get away with a cheaper, bulkier system that will still keep you equally warm and that will still wear for quite a while, but you're not going to get the full benefit. The reason that I personally choose a lot of the gear that I choose is I want to be able to move fast. I want to have that lighter weight stuff, and I will usually go for a layering system rather than one big bulky garment because I want to be able to use it over a wider temperature range. Very often, especially if you're hiking or backpacking, then you'll go through different temperatures during the day. You want to be able to strip things down. You'll go through different activity levels, and you don't want to have to take a big bulky jacket off and stow it away and then freeze your butt off because you don't have any intermediate layers in there. So I will go for more clothing, more intermediate layers, lighter layers that I can add and put together to accomplish the task that I need to accomplish. It is a more expensive way of doing things rather than just one big bulky garment, but you have to pay to play sometimes. There is a bunch of stuff out there that is in the lower price tiers, but I just find that usually when I end up going with those lower price tiers, I'm just not fully satisfied with the performance. And again, I feel like I have to keep saying this over and over again. We're not sponsored by Arc'teryx. They're not paying me to say this. This is just my experience with their equipment. Well, that's about it for this Mail Call Mondays. We are going to leave links to everything that we discussed down in the description section down below. If you guys have questions or comments over anything we've covered, please leave them in the comment section or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app, you can send questions to us at 854-1tactical@gmail.com. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, get out and shoot. Now tell me honestly, does this look like a Star Trek uniform? It looks like a Star Trek uniform to me, but what do I know?